at the end of the day, you really need to just focus on your interview process. Do you even have an interview process? There's so many companies that are, especially the smaller ones, where they have a rough idea of what the process should be. It's not written down anywhere, or if it is written down, it's not really codified. Making some sort of routine that you stick to makes you more fairly evaluate candidates. It reduces biases. And at the end of the day, you're going to be better off.
Welcome to Salesforce Hiring Edge, the show for leaders who want to hire smarter and scale faster with Salesforce.
Whether you're building a team or bringing in a consulting partner, we're breaking down what actually works in the real world.
All right, let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. We are joined again by Mike Mroczka, author of Beyond Cracking the Coding Interview. He's a senior engineer, former Google and Salesforce employee, and he's an interview specialist. We are today going to talk about hiring the right people.
What advice would you give to non-technical leaders in a business to evaluate technical expertise when they may not have the tools or resources in-house?
Good question. And I'd say there's kind of two responses. The question really is, do you have any engineering in-house or not? And let's go kind of with the assumption for a second you don't have any engineering in-house and you contract it all out. I recommend having one core person that you trust. And you can't really evaluate technical skills very well if you're not able to have somebody that can do that proper vetting. But having somebody that can do the vetting for you is great. And that just comes down to having somebody that you can trust to actually get that done right. Now, whether that's through small projects that they build trust over time, I'm not saying blindly go online and trust the first person that looks remotely technical. But as soon as you have somebody, you can use them sort of as a proxy for that. And I think not enough people kind of do that. At the end of the day, if you're trying to do stuff yourself, again, this is something that you can do small projects to bid for, rather than giving them the huge project for the big client and waiting until the last minute to hire somebody. Giving a few small things that you even maybe could do yourself, just to see how long did it take them to do. Wait, you know how to do that task. It took them 4 hours to do that task. That was a 20-minute thing. So being able to kind of give a smaller leash before you sort of let the leash go long, I think is a really important thing to do.
I mean, everyone here is probably aware I work with a variety of companies. Not all of them do tech interviews. Some of them, it's their first interview. Some of them, it's their last interview, right? Some are take-home tests. Some are whiteboard tests. Some are solutioning, including BA-style requirements gathering, and then 2 days later you're presenting and so on. But none of these is perfect. They all kind of have holes, right? So I'm kind of curious, what are the main problems either with each of these or just in general with technical interviews that could be prevented?
Let's talk about in general for a second. I think actually from just a company standpoint, if you're looking to see what you're doing wrong in the interview process, the two biggest things you have control over are the questions you're asking, and then also the interviewers themselves. I've never met somebody that's done interviews and hasn't thought they are a great interviewer. But believe it or not,
God.
there are so many people that are bad at interviews. It's kind of hysterical. Now, some things that make things particularly challenging are an interviewer that insists on asking different questions every time. You really can't compare two candidates if you're asking different questions to different people. So a lot of people don't realize having, to a certain extent, some sort of curriculum that you're roughly following is kind of important. The other thing is the questions themselves. If we're vetting a technical person, we need to make sure that they're technical enough for the job. If we're vetting somebody non-technical, we're also needing to make sure that we're asking them fair things. It's very easy for bias to kind of creep in. A lot of these sorts of biases can be, like harmless things like, oh, you went to the same school I did. There's a connection there. You're more likely to hire that person just based on that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You want kind of that human connection. But at the end of the day, if the only reason you hired one person over another is because they went to the same school as you, that's not exactly the most robust hiring process that exists.
No, it's a total BS reason to hire anybody. People make a lot of look, what happens, this is exactly what happens. People feel familiarity.
Yes.
Right? It's just called rapport. All three of us, we have a certain level of rapport. You can develop it very quickly. I'll remember being 5 years old and you have a best friend within about 10 seconds. You like Legos. I like Legos. This is my best friend. I know I just met him, right? So that's rapport. And it gets harder and harder to develop the older that we get. Excuse me, I don't mean develop. It's harder and harder to develop a deep level of rapport the older we get, as we get more and more set in our ways, unless we are practiced at getting good at developing rapport. And the older you get, if you're in a customer facing role, you will get better at it. And you will probably get slightly worse if you aren't engaged in those types of activities. But this creates bias, as you mentioned. And we can have a rapport. But if I'm not going to hire you to be a coder just because we both like dogs and both believe in training our dogs well, right? So what happens in our mind is we start skipping steps.
Yes.
We go, I like this person. And so number one, you're not going to ask them the tough questions because you don't want to know, right? That's one thing. And two, we're going to ignore obviously poor responses to fair questions. We're going to justify, I'm sure they didn't mean that. This is a nice guy. I'm sure he didn't really mean that. And so the way around this, and I'm sure, Mike, I hope I'm not stealing your own words, but is when you fall in love or fall in like with a candidate, you now must do everything that you can to try and find out why you might not like them.
That's good advice.
Works on the flip side too. I was thinking about our conversation in our last episode together, Mike, where you were talking about how like there's no perfect tech interview, right? Okay, there's no perfect tech interview. And if you actually found a tech interview that prevented all bad actors from coming in, you would probably also be excluding really good candidates because of how rigid that system is and how tight and strong it is. It doesn't freaking work. So you got to do something else. So on the opposite side, what do you have to do? Now you don't like someone. Now you've got to give them an extra shot. Keep digging, keep finding that common ground, help them relax, help them be themselves. Just imagine like this person doesn't talk to their mom like this. They don't talk to their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their kids like this. Probably don't talk to their boss like this. They're probably nervous. How can I calm them down, relax them, get their prefrontal cortex 100% back online so that their brain can start working? And when I hear I'm just ranting for a minute. I'll probably cut this from the show. But when I hear this happen a lot, clients are like, well, they need to be good with customers. And if they can't be comfortable in an interview, then blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, I'm calling bullshit. Because a customer might be a $20, $50, or $100,000 engagement, and they've already signed the first check, right? And they're not going to quit because this person stutters around and stumbles around on their words a little bit or acts a little nervous. By the time the project's done, they're all going to be best friends, probably, or at least close, and they're going to have gone through the tough stuff of running a project collaboratively.
Yeah, Josh, you're pointing out some interesting things there because it's not just the interview and hire that matters. It's the first week, month, 3 months on the job, and how can this person assimilate to the team? I had candidates sail through the interview process I thought were exceptional and came in and were just not good hires, weren't going to fit. And then I've had ones that came through where you're like, well, we probably could go with candidate A or B, but we see potential and see he or she has a great growth mindset. They come in and they just turn out to be the best hire we've ever made.
Yes. It's that song. Listen, that song that you heard on the radio that got you to go buy that album. Like, so you bought the album and that song wore its welcome after 15 or 20 plays, but it's the weird shit. It's that prog rock track that they had that's complex that have even when you're 14 years old and you're like, that sounds a little heavy for me. Like I don't know about that. And that's the song that you're going to love for the rest of your life. Right. So it's the same thing. So you've got to remember that when you're interviewing these people, they're interviewing sometimes for their whole lives. And I don't mean for their entire life. I mean, for their livelihood. I just placed a woman at an SI partner out of New York City. She hadn't worked in 2 years. Wonderful woman. A week before I interviewed her, her husband lost his job. They have children. They don't have a lot of savings because they're fairly young still. She needed this job. Oh my God. Her nerves in those first interviews, they were high. And I could see it. And I called her on it. And she adapted and she adjusted. And you just got to point it out and say, Mike, are you feeling a little bit nervous? Like there's a lot on the line because of this conversation right now?
No, not personally.
No, not personally. But in an interview, you might not you, but a candidate might. And when you call them out on it, they can go, is it showing that badly? Am I really coming off that nervous? And now you shine some light on the problem. So I just wanted to rant for a few minutes. I haven't ranted in a long time on the show. So I just wanted to rant for a minute.
Josh, how do you feel now that you've ranted?
I feel better.
Just to go on it, I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there. One of the other things to note is at the end of the day, we talked about this idea of liking somebody for some particular reason. And I think everyone kind of knows, just because they went to the same school, it's not no reason to treat them specifically in any particular way. But there's also, the opposite bias too. It's like, the number of people I've seen that are like, actually, they went to the school that was my rival or something like that. And again, I use school as just the example, or like let's say if somebody went to Harvard or something like that, there's immediate bias around anything that you see with their resume, and just being aware of like, hey, what is biased information on here? Yes, maybe I worked at Google, maybe I went to Georgia Tech. Those are positives, certainly in the direction. But if I can't talk, if I can't communicate, if I can't use the technical skills that I need to on the job, none of that's really relevant. So both positive and negative bias is something that we need to be aware of.
What is the best and worst interview processes that you've ever seen or heard of?
Man, there are some processes that exist now where they sort of go in the opposite direction. They're like, oh, coding interviews are too hard. They're too technical. We make people too nervous. Let's do the opposite. Let's give them a take home test. Let's give them a lot of time. If they want to code off camera, that's fine. And of course, like even just hearing this, that sounds ridiculous, but there are companies that do this, that will actually hire people based on that. And the only check is like, oh, does your driver's license match? On day one when you kind of go in, it's like, okay, great, you must be who you said you were. And there's, to a certain extent, I think, too much trust that sometimes goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think on the positive side, there's some really good processes that exist at big tech companies. And the reason why they exist, again, is because there are big salaries on the line. And the process tends to involve a lot of different interview types. It's not, can you code, or did you answer what your greatest strength and weakness was well? It's, can you code? Can you communicate? But can you design a big system? And then can you do it repeatedly? So it's not just, was it like, were you lucky, or were you able to do it more than once? Netflix is well known for having somewhere between 6 and 8 interviews to get a single job, but they also pay, $500,000-$600,000. So it's definitely well worth it if you can get through the whole process. But you really have to show multiple times that you know what you're talking about in multiple different dimensions with multiple different people. Maybe that person that gave you a passing, interview at, the coding for the first one, maybe they liked you. Maybe they didn't get as far as they wanted to, but they assume, like you said, bias. Maybe they assume that like they liked you. We talked a little bit too much, but you basically had the answer. But in that second one, maybe the second coding interview, you realize, oh no, there's a problem. It's not actually the right fit. Just processes that are more robust, that test a lot of different things, really is kind of the way to go.
How much rigor do you want to put into the process? I would assume for deeper technical roles, more senior expertise, it's a more rigorous interview process versus junior. Can you talk to that a little bit? I'm curious because you've seen a lot of processes. You know what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah, I think the more senior the role is, the more you really, really need to be sure. And one of the best ways that I've seen, especially smaller companies, kind of make that work well is just a trial. It's like, hey, I'll pay you more than what I should for the first month. But then, after a month, I'll have a really good sense of what you can and can't do. And that's a really kind of good way to go about it. A lot of engineers, especially the really high demand ones, don't like the trial experience. But the way to sort of counteract that is being willing to give a little more than you maybe should in that first month, and then cut it off and be like, hey, this isn't working early, and have that kind of early right to terminate. It's kind of this delicate balance because, as engineers make a good chunk of money. They want to be able to make that good chunk of money, so they're willing to work hard. But even after that first month, it's a really good, it's really hard for somebody to hide that long in the interview process and not realize whether or not they're actually capable of doing what you're asking them to do.
Yeah. Mike, there are companies that I've worked with that will pay for people's time to do some of these at-home solutioning technical tests. We'll call them technical tests or evaluations. What are your thoughts on that? And I just want to sort of mini preamble. When people are in high demand and they're talking to multiple companies, they don't always want to dedicate 5, 6, 8 hours to some sort of technical examination. They couldn't do it for every single company. So now companies are actually paying for their time $100 an hour or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for the most part, it doesn't really solve the problem. The really, really good engineers, for one, are going to skip right over it. They're going to go to the companies that don't ask them to, because like $100 an hour might be great for some folks. But again, it depends on, I guess, to a certain extent, the level, and not everyone can afford to pay every single candidate a crazy amount of money. So usually for the best sort of engineers, it ends up being ones that they'll actually skip altogether. There's actually data that we've collected in the past just about how hard it is to get the good engineers to go through the interview process. Again, it's like with Netflix, there's 5, 6, 8 different interviews that might exist. It's like, that's a big commitment to ask. Like 8 interviews is a lot of time off if you're still working. And if you're not working, it's still a lot of time. So at the end of the day, the balance and the reward really needs to be worth it. And you just need to make sure you're aligned with it. Is this worth a senior engineer's time? And to a certain extent, you have to decide what a senior engineer's time is worth. And that's, kind of dependent on their own company as well.
In the year 25, at least in the Salesforce industry right now, we're seeing it's not like a couple years ago where you couldn't find talent and there was this escalating salary war for all levels of talent. And now pendulum's kind of swung the other way. Does that have an impact on how you can recruit talent? I would say there's probably a larger supply of really good talent on the market right now. So if I'm a hiring manager and I'm talking to Josh to either fulfill roles in-house, or I'm talking to other Josh, me, to pull in a team, how does that factor into my decision-making and how I find talent?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think so many people are looking to, like, if there's 2,000 candidates in the pipeline for the job, they're like, let's pick the top 10. That's not the right way to approach recruiting a lot of the time, I don't think. It's actually just pick the top, or pick 10 that work, 10 that will do the job. But you don't need the 10 best candidates. You just need 10 qualified candidates. At the end of the day, I think people are really worried about this FOMO, fear of missing out, and it doesn't really matter too much about picking the best one, provided they do the right thing for the job. You're right. This market currently makes it so that certain things like the trials that I talked about earlier, like give them a month and see whether or not it works. Engineers are more willing to do that now when it's harder to find a job. So definitely it's something that I think companies can use to their advantage.
Are you still involved in the Salesforce ecosystem to a degree? Or have you been kind of out of it for a little bit? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I've got friends, I have contacts in it, but it's not something that I actively work in. At the end of the day, the Salesforce ecosystem isn't all that different from any other engineering jobs, though, because the markets are still the same. When you look at the big companies that are laying off tech workers left and right, Salesforce was one of them for sure. So this focus on tech work and sort of finding the best people is kind of relevant regardless of where you're interviewing at.
Mike, could you please share the number one thing that companies should be doing differently than they're doing right now in general that you're seeing when it comes to bringing on top talent, especially technical talent?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, you really need to just focus on your interview process. Do you even have an interview process? There's so many companies that are, especially the smaller ones, where they have a rough idea of what the process should be. It's not written down anywhere, or if it is written down, it's not really codified. Making some sort of routine that you stick to makes you more fairly evaluate candidates. If you end with a routine in any interview process, you're going to be better off.
Makes sense. Everyone, this has been the Salesforce Hiring Edge with Josh Matthews, Josh LaQuire, and Mike Mroczka. You can find Mike on LinkedIn, last name Mroczka, first name Mike. You can find him on Amazon. You can find him on GitHub. He's an incredible guest. We can't thank you enough for being on this show today, my friend. You're welcome back anytime. And we wish you vast amounts of success with your consulting career and everything that you're doing to help companies out there in the ecosystem to get better and better at bringing on better teams. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Mike.
having me on.